Jason McDougall believed it was possible. As a wholesaler who was shipping goods to historic Canadian department store chain Fields, his gut told him something was wrong with the retail giant. Wondering if the chain might be for sale, Jason cold called the head of the company and asked him to dinner, never doubting the general manager would say yes. When the dinner conversation eventually turned to the question of buyout, the general manager replied, if there was ever a time to buy, it would be now. What followed was 90 days of frantic activity from Jason, putting the deal together and coming up with the cash. For Jason and his small company, the transaction was like a minnow swallowing a whale. Not only was the retail chain 30 times the size of Jason's actual business, but Jason also had the idea where the money would come from, and he had no idea where it would come from. His biggest bank loan up to that point had just been $5,000. Yet he still believed with utter conviction that he would eventually own Field's department store. Even when the first non-refundable deposit was due of $150,000 that Jason didn't have, his unwavering belief had led him to attend a Thursday night business function where an old friend gave Jason the cash by the Friday morning's deadline. How uncanny is that? Right place, right time. The opportunity is always there. When you're ready, the opportunity will always appear. Deep Sea World in Queensferry was a chance meeting at a business function where one guy was speaking about Deep Sea World and the other guy was passing at the same time and overheard him talking about it. And that chance meeting led to Deep Sea World being in Queensferry. If it wasn't for that walk by and him overhearing him talking about it, it would never have happened. So it's opportunity is there when an opportunity readiness meets. That's really what it comes down to. You have to be focused and in the zone at the time, and it will happen for you. Another stage, Jason found himself $400,000 short in making a $1 million deposit with a deadline that was just 2 hours away. Using his internal guidance and steadfast belief, Jason came up with the money just minutes before the deadline passed. And just 25 days later, another $12 million was due. Jason miraculously assembled 2 banks and 6 private investors, one of whom rushed through the paperwork in order to meet the funding deadline. Hi, Julie. Hi, Grant. Thanks very much for your nice words. At each stage of the transaction, as larger and larger non-refundable deposits were due, Jason had an absolute faith that the deal would happen. It had to. In fact, it was either bring in the cash or lose it. Only the deal. But not only the deal, but if the money he'd paid up to that point, he would also lose as well. So how did Jason maintain his unwavering belief in the face of incredible odds? He followed his own guiding philosophy that if the thing was supposed to happen, it will happen. If God had put him on his path, he said, the transaction was meant to be. Of course, the fact that each deadline was met through the remarkable and stupendous means only galvanized Jason's belief that this deal was destined to close. Darren Peaty and the East Nuke Salt Company. How on earth did that happen? He managed to make it happen. He had unwavering belief. And you could hear about Darren's story if you go on the East Nuke Salt Company. It's amazing what that guy's brought together. Each small successes along the way made him believe even more that the victory was on the horizon. By the time the transaction was eventually completed, 6 months later, Jason had raised tens of millions of dollars, bought an established company that was an institution in Canada, saved hundreds of jobs, and created a sizable new business for himself, all because he believed it was possible. I had an unwavering belief that I would be a company financial director before I was 30-years old. Literally, a few weeks before I was hit 30, I was offered a job without actually going for that job. I went for the job as a financial controller and ended up walking out as a financial director. I had a unwavering conviction that that's what I wanted to be. I always programmed myself for that. And the same thing happened for me when I always wanted to retire before I was 40 years old. And that was from the age of 25. I set that belief in motion. And I retired when I was 38. Unwavering conviction will take you forward. I'll maybe tell people about that journey one day and the things I'd said in between to other people at that time. I look back on it now and I think, wow, it was going to happen. And the things I did to make it happen. So you must find a place in yourself where nothing is impossible. It's not what you don't know that holds you back. It's what you do know that isn't true and goes through your mind. In 1983, 61-year-old scrawny and socially awkward potato farmer named Cliff. This is an amazing story. The Cliff Shuffle. This is for the ultra runners out there. If you're an ultra runner, this is the story you'll want to hear. Entered the Sydney and Melbourne ultramarathon, which was considered one of the world's most difficult physical challenges. 544 miles, 875 kilometres of flats and hills that would take 6 or 7 days to complete. The runners were allowed to eat and sleep as they chose, and the winner would win $10,000. When Cliff showed up in overalls and rain boots, the other runners, who were much younger and dressed in the latest Nike and Reebok and Adidas running gear, actually laughed and made fun of him. The race officials were worried Cliff might die actually of a heart attack. But Cliff assured them that he had grown up on a farm where they couldn't afford horses or four-wheel drives. And whatever the storm was coming, he'd often run for 2 or 3 days without sleep in order to run around his family's and gather up his 2,000 sheep on their 2,000-acre ranch in his rain boots and his overalls. Cliff was prepared for this. No one took that. No one realised that by the look of him and how he was presented. Good evening, Alana. How are you? Hi, Anne-Marie. Hi, Jill. How are you? Listening to you from Canada. Well, there you go. I'm talking about Fields, one of Canada's biggest supermarkets. Okay, when the race started, all the other runners took off at high speed, leaving Cliff in the dust. Cliff, however, started with a slow, lop-pacing style that would later become known as the Cliff Young Shuffle. Now, the race officials were sure Cliff would collapse and die somewhere on the route, but Cliff had a secret that no one knew about, including him. You see, Cliff had never met another long-distance runner. He had no idea. He had never talked to a coach either. He had never read Runner's World magazine or a book on long-distance running. He therefore didn't know how you were supposed to sleep for 6 or 7 hours the night before during a long-distance endurance race. He had no idea how this went on and how they got through. That first night, Cliff slept for only 2 hours. By running while the others slept, he took the lead in the first night and maintained it for the remainder of the race. The next day, he ran non-stop for 23 hours, pausing for sleep only for 1 hour. Running with virtually no sleep for the entire race, Cliff crossed the finish line 10 hours ahead of the next finisher. 10 hours ahead. He had covered 544 miles in 5 days and 15 hours and 4 minutes. That is over 100 miles a day. The equivalent of almost 4 marathons a day, shattering the previous race record by more than 2 days. Cliff's story illustrates that sometimes it isn't what you don't know that stops your success. It's what you do know that isn't really true. It's how you've been conditioned and how you've been programmed throughout your life. It will then dictate what your future is going to be like. You do not want to do that. You can program your future for success and move on from there. Nothing can stop you if you have that definite conviction that will happen. It is wise to question all of your assumptions about how things are done and be open to new possibilities. When I went in for my knee operation a month ago, no one told me it was going to take 2 weeks to recover. I expected to be recovered in 1 day. And I was back on my feet in 1 day. No one told me that I wouldn't be running for a long time. But the reality was, I was back running almost 2 days after my knee operation. I was on an anti-gravity treadmill 10 days after my knee operation. My leg bent all the way up and it was perfect function after that. Even the physio couldn't understand and couldn't believe how that miraculous recovery took place. But it was conditioned in my mind. I didn't know any other way, and I expected that to happen. The same thing happened for Josh Quigley when he was knocked off his bike at 70 miles an hour from behind in America and ended up in concussion and almost on his deathbed in a hospital bed in America. He told everybody that he would be back on his bike within 2 or 3 weeks. They thought he was nuts and he had no chance. Even the doctors wouldn't believe him. But the reality was, 2 or 3 weeks later, Josh Quigley got back on his bike and now he's back to fighting fitness. And he's basically doing the Tour de France mileage around Lothians as we speak. Every single day, he's doing the Tour de France mileage. And that's within a year of actually having that major catastrophe and crash. So no one tells you how to do things. You could program your mind to do it, and the rest of your body will fall into place and work towards healing you in order to make that happen. And I'll see you tomorrow.